Peter Montgomery is a good friend, a senior fellow at People for the American Way, and an associate editor at Religion Dispatches. He's a remarkably good-natured fella, considering how much time he spends tracking the extremist religious right, and so I'm always happy to welcome him to State of Belief Radio. Peter, welcome.
Thanks. I always enjoy being here.
How do you keep from staying mad all the time?
Well, sometimes I am mad, and sometimes I just laugh, and sometimes I just shake my head.
I see. Well, we're going really to one today we could do all of that with. We're going to be talking about the Texas GOP. Mm-hmm. Last weekend, the Texas GOP held their annual convention. Did you get to go?
I did not go, but I spent a lot of time reading and listening.
Well, since the state party is considered very influential in national party politics, the conventions watched pretty closely. They didn't disappoint you, did they?
No, in some ways it was kind of a replay of what I saw in Tampa in 2012, where every effort to bring forth some kind of moderating influence into the platform was squelched, and it was really the far right and the religious right activists and the hardcore Tea Party anti-immigrant folks that wrote that platform.
Is there any real-world significance to the removal of some overt anti-gay language from the state party platform when other such language still exists, and especially when a wholehearted endorsement of so-called reparative therapy got added?
Yeah, no, I think they took out a little bit of rhetoric that said that homosexuality was tearing at the fabric of our society, and it's good that that's gone. But the more important part of the platform that's talking about policy still insisted on legal discrimination against gay people and same-sex couples. So you still have that discrimination language. Yeah. Then you add this endorsement of so-called ex-gay therapy or reparative therapy to fix gay people, which has been disavowed by every major reputable medical association. Yeah. And then plus there's a little bit in there about court stripping, too, where they would try to deny the federal courts the rights to even to rule on these marriage cases.
Yeah. Some derisively call so-called cures for homosexuality pray away the gay. This stuff is purely based on conservative religious dogma, isn't it?
It is. And sometimes they try to dress it up a little bit as if it's some kind of scientific therapy. But the fact is, every medical association, the psychological association, the psychiatric association, they've all disavowed it. And so that's really why it's left in the realm of religious right activists and religious right conferences promoting this stuff. And in Texas, that's also the GOP.
Yeah. Does anybody ever have another idea? Does anybody ever disagree in the Texas GOP?
Well, I think there was effort by some gay Republicans to resist some of this language and get it out, but they were, of course, shot down. Yeah. The way that people who wanted a more moderate language on immigration were shot down.
I don't want to go too far away from this topic of the Texas GOP, but Peter, do you understand why people have those kinds of thoughts? I mean, is it a lack of understanding? Is it meanness? Is it sheer politics? What is it?
On the anti-gay stuff?
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of things. I think some people really do ground it in their religious beliefs. Uh-huh. And those are not people who feel very strongly about separation of church and state. So for them, if the Bible says it's a sin and they believe it is, then they're fine on trying to make that the law for everybody. Yeah. I think for some of it, it's ignorance. It's really ignorance about what sexuality is. And that's certainly promoted by right-wing politicians and pastors.
Is the Texas GOP pandering to the religious right, or is it being run by the religious right?
Oh, it's definitely being run by the religious right. At this point, there's no pandering involved. I mean, we really are seeing the Ted Cruzification completed of the Republican Party. You know, he was kind of an outsider when he came into the party not very long ago, and now the party has become his. And, you know, of course, he's hoping to make that true on the national level.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that what happened in Texas last week has implications in other states and on the national platform heading into the midterm elections?
I think there's no way it can't have some kind of influence. Certainly, it energizes the Tea Party folks. It energizes the religious right leaders by having a big victory. And, after the 2012 election in Tampa, after the 2012 Republican convention, there were some very brave sort of Republican gay activists saying, oh, well, this is the last time we're ever going to have anti-gay language in our platform. And I thought at the time they were being optimistic, verging on delusional. I think what we saw in Texas is more likely a sign of what's to come.
Is it fair to ask you, who are the leaders of the Texas GOP?
Sure. One of them is David Barton, who you certainly know as this promoter of bogus Christian nation history. He, for many years, was an official in the Texas GOP. He's still very influential. He was influential in writing the national platform in 2012, and so he's still active in Texas. We have Kathy Adams, who used to be the chair of the state party and who now heads Eagle Forum there. She was also very active in all these platform deliberations. She is actually the person who introduced the reparative therapy platform. That came straight from Eagle Forum and the religious right. So Eagle Forum actually had its banquet in sort of conjunction with the Republican convention. And so there's a lot of pictures there of Ted Cruz with David Barton and Tom DeLay. And so it's really, a lot of that national leadership of the religious right comes out of Texas.
And Tom DeLay's back in acceptance, right?
Yeah, of course he is. He's back in circulation.
What else are we going to need to keep an eye on in terms of anti-science, conservative, Christian-driven political agendas?
Well, some of that was also in the platform. So, certainly the climate change denial was in the platform. Efforts to, oppose textbooks that go down the road that the religious right doesn't buy into. So I think the science on sexuality, the science on reproductive choice, the science on climate, anything else that they don't agree with, basically.
Most anything makes sense.
That's right.
I see. Peter, people are listening to us, and I know this kind of conversation disturbs them, and they get nervous and disturbed and angry. And so what in the world can we do about this? How do you answer the question?
Well, there's a lot of pieces to that. One is, supporting organizations like yours and mine that do work on this, but a lot of it is really getting involved. One of the dispiriting things about Robbie Jones' poll that I went to hear a briefing that he did yesterday was how many people are not intending to vote this fall because they're dispirited, because they're disappointed in Barack Obama. The number of people under 30 planning to vote was something like 24%. That's just brutal.
Yeah.
And the Tea Party is really energized. They've got another big scalp to hang on the wall now that they knocked out Eric Cantor. So they are going to be very energized. And it's really a task for the entire progressive movement to convince young people and progressive people and folks who don't share the vision of the religious right to do something about it, to get involved, because otherwise they're excited and they're involved and they'll do things like we just saw in Texas.
Peter, if you were looking at the whole state of Texas from a distance and you saw what was going on in the Republican Party and you compared that with what's going on in the Democratic Party, what would that look like?
Well, I think there is a big investment among a lot of Democratic strategists and thinkers and some donors to sort of really invest in Texas again. I think for a long time, progressives and national Democrats really kind of abandoned the Texas Democratic Party. And so there's infrastructure there isn't as strong as it should be. So I think there's a lot of investment happening there now. And I think there's a real effort to try to lift the engagement of Latino voters in Texas who don't turn out as much as they need to. Now, one of the interesting things that the Tea Party folks have just nominated for lieutenant governor of Texas this guy, Dan Patrick, who people are calling the Pete Wilson of Texas. His rhetoric on immigration is terrible. It's, an invasion and people bringing in third world diseases. And so that is not going to help the Texas GOP in the long term with the growing number of Latinos in that state. So there's a long game at work that is more favorable to progressives, but it doesn't just happen.
I can't let you go without asking the election question, because you know so much about the religious right and organizing principles behind what they do. What do you think is going to happen in the midterm elections?
Well, there's not a lot of reasons for optimism right now. When you look at this information on the enthusiasm gap from right-wing activists and groups of voters that tend to support conservative candidates versus younger voters, voters of color, people who are more likely to support progressive candidates. And we also have a big investment being made both by the Koch brothers, by people like Ralph Reed, who next week is having his big Faith and Freedom get-together in D.C., which is all about mobilizing conservative voters. So there's a big investment on the other side, and I'm not sure what it's going to take on our side to change the momentum that for this fall, but hopefully some smart political strategist will figure something out, because I think it doesn't look really great right now.
When you look at the religious right today compared with the religious right when we first started following it, it's very different, I think, in strategy and in political genius, I guess. These are not dumb people now. And before, there were a few smart people, but Ralph Reed kind of changed where that was. How do you compare where the religious right is now, not just in Texas, but all over, where it is now and where it was when we first started it?
Well, when it started, it was more of an outsider movement. Mm-hmm. And it's now the Republican Party in a lot of places in the country, not everywhere, but in much of the country. And that's certainly reflected if you look at the Republican caucus in Congress, which is now, as a small aside, once Eric Cantor is gone, 100% Christian. Yeah. But it's also, it's just much more in control of a lot of the party apparatus, a lot of the elected officials, at local and state and national level. Yeah. So the power is much more institutionalized. And, it's not, there was kind of the moral majority had its heyday in the 80s and the Christian Coalition in the 90s. There's really a huge infrastructure. So there's not any one group that stumbles or one leader that stumbles. It's not going to derail the movement because they've spent a lot of time. They've got a network of law schools that's cranking out lawyers and people who go take internships in White House and in congressional offices. It's got think tanks in every state of the country. So they don't go anywhere. And the Tea Party and the religious right are not entirely separate things. As some people want to see them, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. And the Tea Party kind of just puts a stronger anti-government, anti-tax focus on the right-wing agenda. But Ted Cruz is a great example of someone who really embodies both movements. And there's a big effort from the Heritage Foundation and a lot of other strategists like Ralph Reed to continue to merge the energies of those two movements, particularly when it comes to putting people in office.
One last question. You look at all of this material as much, if not more, than anyone else. Is there any one thing that bothers you about where we are right now more than any other?
Well, I guess I would say that the willingness of some of the far right to talk in rhetoric that is violent, that talks about maybe the need for revolution, that really pushes this notion that, Barack Obama is not just a president that they disagree with, but that he's a tyrant. There's pushing this thing out there that now that he may try to do something to cancel the 2016 elections and stay in office. And it sounds ridiculous to us, but there are millions of people around the country being fed this stuff day after day after day. And so I think the amount of divisiveness that has been pushed by the far right and by people like Fox News, it just makes everything so toxic. It makes it very hard. So here's Eric Cantor, who is a very, very conservative congressional leader, but because he sometimes did make some compromises to govern, he got tossed out. I mean, that kind of shows the level of extremism of the party's base, and that's going to make any progress for this country pretty tough.
People who want to follow what you write, where could they best see it?
They can follow us at rightwingwatch.org, which is People for the American Way's blog on the right. ReligionDispatches.org is that magazine, and I'm at Pete Mont on Twitter.
Peter Montgomery is Associate Editor at Religion Dispatches and a Senior Fellow at People for the American Way. Peter, thanks for coming in. It's always fun to sit down and talk, and you're always welcome on State of Belief Radio.
Thank you.